Well, thank you for joining us. Unionist Voice Policy Studies is holding a discussion tonight with Mr. Ben Habib. Mr. Habib is one of the applicants in the ongoing judicial review proceedings, which is currently waiting judgment in the High Court alongside Ms. Kate Hoy, Jim Allister, Mr. Trimble and Arlene Foster. And I hope I haven't left anybody out. But Ben has been a sterling campaigner in recent months in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol, and you're very welcome, Ben, and thank you for taking the time to have the discussion.
Not at all, thank you.
Look, if we just start, I noticed some commentary once I tweeted that we were going to be having this discussion, Ben, from people online pointing out that you voted for the withdrawal agreement. I suppose at the start, if I just give a little space to explain that or address that if you want to.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was fiercely critical of the withdrawal agreement when it was first revealed on the 17th of October 2019. And I was very, very torn when it came to the European Parliament on the 28th of January 2020 on whether or not I should vote for it. And in the end, I voted for the withdrawal agreement because the alternative would have been to signal to the world, one, that I was voting against Brexit, having stood on a soapbox, if you like, for over 3 years up until that point, campaigning for Brexit. But also, it was significantly down to the promises that the Prime Minister had made in the Conservative Party manifesto. And central to that promise, he made many Brexit promises, but central to that promise was that the United Kingdom would leave the European Union as one united kingdom. And so even though I well knew that Northern Ireland under the Northern Ireland Protocol was being left behind, I got the impression that with his 80-seat majority, he was going to unpick the protocol. And actually, if you listen to what Michael Gove and others said post the election victory, they were all indicating that's what they were going to do. Indeed, Michael Gove in May last year sat in front of the Lord Select Committee on the EU and said that they were going to put the protocol right before it was implemented. They were going to renegotiate its terms as part of the trade and cooperation agreement. So, with the benefit of hindsight, should I or should I not have voted for the withdrawal agreement? Probably I'd vote for it again because we had to get out of the European Union. But what I really need and what the nation needs is for the Prime Minister now to deliver the promise he made during the election, which is for the United Kingdom to be one united kingdom.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Ben. And as you know, we're just going to try and focus now on the judicial review and some of the legal issues. And you've been as I said at the start, a sterling campaigner on those issues. And I suppose I should just say at the start, as a unionist in Northern Ireland, thank you for the efforts that you have made for our community and how you've stood up for our community in this process, and we're very grateful for that. So, if we just start initially, I suppose, on the active union point. Now, the active union point almost has two grounds of challenge within it, insofar as we have the misuse of the Crown prerogative in a manner which conflicts the active union, and then we have the domestic provisions in the Withdrawal Act, which plainly then supports to the appeal of the active union. So I suppose if we take those two separate parts, although obviously they're interlinked in some respects, but if we start first, do you want to just give a brief overview of the use of the Crown prerogative and making the treaty?
Yeah, well, it's fascinating when you read the Withdrawal Agreement Act 2018. So that's the Act of Parliament that was passed in order to allow us to sign the withdrawal agreement. It was varied in 2020 for Boris Johnson's own deal, but effectively the main part of the act was passed in 2018. And Article 8 of the Withdrawal Agreement Act 2018 states that ministers will be entitled to do whatever they need to do in order to give effect to the withdrawal agreement. But Article 10 expressly prohibits any variation to the Northern Ireland Act of 1998. And the purpose behind that was to comply with the recitals of the Northern Ireland Protocol in the Withdrawal Agreement, which basically say that nothing will be done to mess with the Belfast Agreement. And so there's an absolute prohibition in Article 10 of the Withdrawal Agreement 2018 on ministers doing anything to vary the Northern Ireland Act of 1998. And then on the 9th of December 2020, really late in the day, when people weren't really focusing on it, Brandon Lewis sought to, and did, using a statutory instrument, insert into the Northern Ireland Act 1998 the approval processes that are prescribed in the Northern Ireland Protocol for the renewal of it in 2024 and subsequent votes every 4 years. And when he did that, effectively what he did, Jamie, was to drive a coach and horses through the Belfast Agreement, because the cornerstone of the Belfast Agreement is that all constitutional decisions would require cross-community consent. And here he is actually messing with the Northern Ireland Act of 1998 in breach of the in breach of the Withdrawal Agreement 2018, and undermining a basic tenet of the Belfast Agreement, which is nothing would happen with the constitutional setup of Northern Ireland without a cross-community consent. So that's the first major point, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that links into two points, because obviously, and I'm just looking here at section 10(1), subsection 1A of the 2018 Act, and it's quite clear, actually. It says, in exercising any of the parts of this Act, a Minister of the Crown or devolved authority must act in a way which is compatible with the terms of the Northern Ireland Act. Now, I suppose it's somewhat of an elementary proposition, isn't it, that one does not act in accordance with the terms of the Northern Ireland Act if, in fact, that you have to purport to amend the Northern Ireland Act, and that's somewhat of a contradiction at the heart of the Secretary of State's position, is it not?
Well, I think it's more than a contradiction. I mean, I think they've abused the Northern Ireland Act 1998. They said that anything they did would have to be compatible with it, and therefore the Belfast Agreement. And in fact, when you look at the Northern Ireland Protocol, it does the opposite. It requires a fundamental change to the approval processes. Now, the way cross-community consent is set up, Jamie, as you'll know better than me, is it's very hard for stuff to get approved. And there's reason for that, because both communities have to be settled on the issue. So to foist this new constitutional arrangement through the protocol on Northern Ireland, to step round the cross-community consent, and then somehow say, well, actually, we're going to give you the ability to repudiate it or denounce it in 2024, knowing full well that it will be as difficult to denounce it as it would have been to pass it in the first place, is actually disingenuous. The government has malignantly and willfully breached the Northern Ireland Act 1998 and therefore the Belfast Agreement. So this entire narrative that the protocol is set up to comply with the Belfast Agreement is a false narrative.
Yeah, and I think just on that too, in relation to section 42, I suppose maybe I can just add a little bit in the cross-community consent mechanisms, because the government has made the argument in the House, in Parliament, sorry, that because they say that the making of treaties and the withdrawal agreement is not an evolved matter, that section 42 of the 1998 Act doesn't apply. But actually, and if anybody's here and they want to go and get it up in front of them, it's section 42 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. Section 42 applies to key decisions or just a decision coming before the Assembly. It doesn't lend itself it doesn't constrain itself, to being solely in relation to devolved matters. So I think that's a total red herring by the government.
It is. It's an absolute red herring. And the other thing I just want to add before we move away, if we are about to move away from the Northern Ireland Act, is that Act, that 1998 Act, is of constitutional importance in the United Kingdom. It is not just a minor act of Parliament which enabled them to sign the Belfast Agreement, which in effect is a treaty itself. It is of constitutional importance. And so varying it without having had an explicit act of Parliament in Westminster is just fundamentally unsound.
Yeah, I think it's unlawful to, if Parliament want to tinker with or amend or repeal, which Parliament could do, a constitutional statute. I mean, Parliament have to face up to that, have to own that, and do that expressly. And the notion that by some general power that the Secretary of State could then, by secondary legislation, amend the constitutional statute, it seems an incredible proposition.
It's so wrong. It's so wrong. And on that point, I find it I would be absolutely gobsmacked if we don't win on that central important point. I'd be absolutely gobsmacked. There's another central important point, which I'm sure we'll get to. But I'd be absolutely staggered if we don't win on that point, because as far as I'm concerned, the government has been caught with its hand in the proverbial till on dealing with the Northern Ireland Act 1998.
Yeah, I suppose while we're on the 98 Act, we'll stay with that for a minute, because this will link into the active union point. But Section 1, subsection 1 of the Northern Ireland Act is to protect the constitutional status of Northern Ireland, that can't be changed without the majority of people in Northern Ireland voting for it. And I suppose what has happened here is, and we'll come on to the argument that the active union has been repealed, but I don't think anybody could argue that there hasn't been a significant change to the substance of Northern Ireland's relationship with the rest of the United Kingdom. So I think the key question here is, does Section 1, subsection 1 of the 1998 Act protect the substance of the union, the component parts of it, or merely the symbolism of the union? And I think, as John Larkin superbly put it in the High Court, I mean, does it just protect against the last severing of the ties between Ireland and Great Britain? I mean, what's your views on that in terms of the constitutional status?
Well, I mean, I completely obviously agree with John Larkin that it's not the last tether of the union that needs to be severed in order for Article 1 of the Belfast Agreement to be breached. This Northern Ireland Protocol, as far as I'm concerned, breaches it completely. You have Northern Ireland subject to around 300 European Union laws, some of which, by the way, we didn't touch on this when we talked about the approval processes. Some of those obligations are not subject to a review in 2024. They're not capable of being denounced in 2024, even if Stormont votes to get rid of them. So there are things in the Northern Ireland Protocol which simply foisted on the people of Northern Ireland in perpetuity. And so I, absolutely agree with John Larkin. Article 1 of the Belfast Agreement is not about the last tether of a connection with the Union of the United Kingdom. It's about the fundamental nature of the relationship. And that has been materially changed following the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Yeah, and I know we'll come on shortly to the active union point, but I mean, I think it still applies in relation to the exercise of the Crown prerogative. I mean, if the government are going to use the Crown prerogative in the making of treaties, it's an elementary proposition of constitutional law that they can't do so in a manner which conflicts with domestic law. And not only, as we'll come to, do they act in defiance of the active union, but it appears, and I'm not sure if you'll agree with me or not, but it certainly appears to my mind that they've also breached the Belfast Agreement and domestic law in terms of the Northern Ireland Act 1998, which would again sound against the use of the prerogative to implement these aspects of the protocol. Would you be in agreement?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They've ridden roughshod over previous acts of Parliament and the Constitution of the United Kingdom. And we haven't even touched on the Act of Union yet, which is perhaps the most gobsmacking element of their whole case, But it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary that the Conservative and Unionist Party would behave in this way.
Yeah, well, I suppose that does bring us on to the active union point. It just sort of give those watching a bit of a flavour as to what is going on here, and I'm sure then you can expand upon it. In domestic law, Section 7A purports to confer enforceability on the withdrawal agreement, including the protocol, by use of general words, but in order for that to be effective, it would have to, it clearly conflicts with the active union, which is a constitutional statute, and the government's answer to that is to say that by implication they have repealed parts of Article 6, which appears to me to be an extraordinary argument for any Conservative and Union.
Yeah. Well, before we discuss that, I'm just going to, for the sake of viewers, just describe what they breached in the Act of Union, which is Article 6, as you just said, Jamie. And Article 6 is the most elegantly, beautifully written article, as was the want of, laws written in that time. And I recommend anyone to read Article 6. It's very short, it's very understandable, and what it essentially says is that every part of the United Kingdom should have equal access to every other part of the United Kingdom, and that every citizen in the United Kingdom should be treated equally with every other citizen in the United Kingdom, and that no government can enter into a treaty that foists different rights and obligations on different parts of the United Kingdom and therefore its people. And it was designed to protect what was then Ireland, and of course is now Northern Ireland. And so it's really poignant that actually the Northern Ireland Protocol confers on Northern Ireland, and therefore the people, the British citizens in Northern Ireland, a completely different set of laws. And when we went into court on the 14th of May, we thought the government would try and argue some kind of constitutional alchemy point, that actually the Act of Union hasn't been breached, that every citizen's being treated the same. And we thought they'd try and, just kind of wash over this very important central part of the United Kingdom, the Constitution of the United Kingdom. And actually what their barrister got up in court and said, which was stunning, was that the Withdrawal Agreement Act 2018 had effectively repealed the Act of Union. And I know you did, because you tweeted immediately there, immediately afterwards. And when I heard this, I couldn't believe that the government would get up in a high court in our country and actually say the Act of Union 1800 no longer applies. In other words, Jamie, what they're saying is that we are no longer united in the United Kingdom. That's what they've said. And the other thing that's staggering, I'm going to just digress for a second, is that no mainstream media, no commentator has picked up on the fact that by the government's own admission, the Union of the United Kingdom no longer exists. It's utterly staggering. Now, I care a great deal about Northern Ireland, but one of the reasons I'm fighting this case is because if we can't protect Northern Ireland, it is the end of the Union of the United Kingdom. And I am a unionist, not just on behalf of Northern Ireland, but also Scotland, Wales, and England. We are one United Kingdom. And I cannot believe the government barrister getting up in court and saying the Act of Union, Article 6 of the Act of Union, has effectively been repealed. I never thought they would say that. And if people listening to this interview need to be banging that drum, they need to be communicating to everyone they know, telling them that the government has basically admitted that it has broken the Union of the United Kingdom. It is absolutely abhorrent.
I agree with you. I think it was one of the most extraordinary things that I'd ever witnessed in a courtroom when I seen the senior counsel for the government effectively arguing, as you say, in the High Court, that they first of all, I think the argument is weak as water, but nevertheless, the fact that they would even make it, but just on getting that message out, because it is quite a niche point. It's a very legalistic point. What do you think in terms of how we get that message out in a manner which can be understood by a lay person who may be not so interested or involved in law? How do we spread that message in a manner which is going to be acceptable and understandable?
Well, again, the government's been caught with its hand in the proverbial constitutional till, messing around with the Constitution of the United Kingdom and breaching the Constitution. Now, just like the Northern Ireland Act 1998, the Act of Union 1800 is of constitutional importance, and it can't just be repealed through government action. It can't be inadvertently removed. It can't be ditched without the express approval of Parliament. And so the idea that the Withdrawal Agreement Act somehow overrides the Act of Union is utter nonsense. And it's to the common man on the Clapham omnibus, it's obvious that it's wrong, isn't it? It's obvious that the Act of Union has been breached because Northern Ireland is left partly behind in the European Union. So even without looking at the law, that the Act of Union has been breached. And for the government to basically say that act no longer applies is to turn its back on the Union of the United Kingdom. And it just is fundamentally wrong. I mean, I would hope that would be enough for people to be able to communicate it. The correct terminology is impliedly repealed. And I think that then shrouds the whole thing in a nebulous cloud of legalism. But to describe it in lay terms, perhaps the best way to say it is the government secretly repealed the Act of Union.
Yeah. And they sort of hoisted on the petard a little bit, because they on one hand, the government are arguing that they have repealed the Act of Union, and I mean, the Act of Union is the Union in law. It's
Absolutely.
a very foundational stone Union. So on one hand, they're arguing that they have, by implication, repealed the Act of Union by the general words in Section 7A of the 2018. But if that's the case, if we take their case at its height, then plainly how does that not offend the protections within Section 1, subsection 1 of the Northern Ireland Act in terms of protecting the constitutional status of Northern Ireland? They would have to effectively be arguing, and this goes back to does it only protect the last vestige of Britishness in Northern Ireland? So the logic of their argument is they've repealed the Act of Union, but that doesn't matter for the constitutional protections of Northern Ireland, because the Belfast Agreement doesn't actually extend to protecting the substance of the Union. It's just a symbolism. I mean, I find that an equally extraordinary argument.
I mean, I mean, all these points are interlinked, obviously, and they're all extraordinary. What's happened here, Jamie, in summary, without wishing to jump to the end of the interview, is that the government has tried to remove what everyone claimed would be a hard border on the island of Ireland, put a border in the Irish Sea, and claim actually it's no border at all. Now, either it's a hard border on the island of Ireland, in which case it's definitely a hard border in the Irish Sea, or it's not a hard border on the island of Ireland, and it's not a hard border in the Irish Sea, but they can't have it every each way. And effectively, the government has misled the nation. It misled the nation during the general election in order to be elected. It misrepresented what the Northern Ireland Protocol is, and now it's twisting in the wind, trying to find any interpretation of the law to justify its false position. And they should lose on this point as well. I mean, it would be abhorrent, again, I think, for the court to find that the government, I mean, for the court to find in the government's favour would be for the court to confirm that the Act of Union no longer stands. And I don't believe the Act of Union no longer stands. It is that the government has breached the Act of Union, and therefore the protocol is illegal.
Yeah, and if the court had found that the Act of Union had by implication been repealed, then the court has a decision to make in terms of what protections Section 1, subsection 1 of the 1990
Absolutely. They're in a cul-de-sac. You can't go one. You can't go one way, not the other. Patch 22. Yeah.
I think that's the if I'm sure he won't be offended at me praising him in such a manner, but I think that's a genius of John Larkin. But
he's a genius.
Yeah. Oh no, he absolutely is. And on the, I think you made a good point there about the government pretending that there's not a border. I mean, call it what you will, there's plainly a customs border, and if you look at Article 5 of the protocol, clearly there's going to be customs checks on anything which is at risk in the European Union. But the difficulty is that Article 5, paragraph 2, everything starts from the default presumption of being at risk of going into the European Union. So, I mean, I just don't see any credible argument for saying that there's not a customs border between the United Kingdom now, between Northern Ireland and Great Britain.
I mean, what the Prime Minister needs to do actually is face up to the fact that it's an abomination of an agreement, and he needs to denounce it. And he has the right to denounce it, again, without wishing to jump ahead. Under Article 46 of the Vienna Convention, which is the international convention pursuant to which treaties can be made or broken, it says under Article 46 that if there's domestic law, which is patently obvious and critical and prevents the government from entering into a treaty, then that treaty is void. And so actually, the withdrawal agreement is a void treaty. And the government needs to face up to that.
Yeah, I thought that was an act. And interestingly, I think John Larkin developed that argument a little bit further the first time that I'd heard it, when he developed it in the High Court, and that he essentially said that, well, in domestic law, Section 7A of the 2008 Act, in terms of conferring domestic enforceability on the withdrawal agreement, if the government, in the first instance, actually acted unlawfully in the use of the prerogative in making the treaty, then plainly Section 7 of the 2018 Act
doesn't stand.
You can't enforce an unlawful treaty. And again, I think the cul-de-sac with that, are they not?
Yeah, they are. Absolutely. They've made an unlawful treaty.
Yeah. So in terms of potential solutions or ways out of this mess. How do you think or what way out do you think that there is?
Well, there's only one way out. There is only one way out, and that is to denounce the withdrawal agreement, because you can't denounce the Northern Ireland Protocol without the entire withdrawal agreement going. Denounce the withdrawal agreement and put the customs checks where they should have gone in the first place, where there's been a border for over 100 years, which separates two countries, two currencies, two different tax rates, two different VAT rates, excise duties, and everything else, and use a smart border system to ensure that none of the nationalists or anyone south of the border can claim that military installations, which is the only thing that's forbidden in the Belfast Agreement, military installations don't exist at the border. One thing I just point out to viewers is in November 2017, you can look it up, November 2017, the European Union produced a report on the possibility of a smart border on the island of Ireland. And actually, it was perfectly feasible and admitted by the EU back in 2017. People should read it. The EU accepted in 2017, that the border could easily go there and wouldn't breach any agreements, any Belfast provisions, Belfast Agreement provisions. But during the course of 2017-2018, people like Leo Varadkar and other members of the European Union, including Guy Verhofstadt and Michel Barnier, and so on, they alighted on the border issue as a mechanism to beat the United Kingdom. And Theresa May gave into that narrative. And sadly, Boris Johnson hasn't had the courage to debug it. What he needed to simply say is that this is nonsense, and we are going to put customs checks where they deserve to go. And we won't man the border. We don't even need to have any customs checks. There's only 5 billion of trade per annum going both ways. There's about 27 billion going across the RSC. And the total trade of the United Kingdom with the EU is 650 billion. So you've got less than 1% of EU-UK trade going across across the border on the island of Ireland. It's a non-issue, Jamie. The solution is simple. Denounce the protocol, denounce the withdrawal agreement, put the customs checks where they should go. And if the British government doesn't want to institute customs checks because it's too shy to do it, don't bother, because the trade isn't meaningful enough. And if the EU insists on putting customs checks in place, well, on their head be it.
Yeah, I think it was always, and I think you touched on it there, it was an extraordinary situation that any sovereign government, any sovereign part in the world would be so shy that to use your word about actually manning their own border between Northern Ireland and Irish Republic. It's as if unionists in Northern Ireland, we have to pretend that we're actually in all Ireland. I mean, it's an incredible proposition which hasn't been drilled down upon at all, and this narrative in the mainstream media that in order to protect peace, you can't have a land border around of Ireland. I mean, do you not feel in some respects that firstly the words a threat of violence and almost gives a veto to those who would threaten violence if you allowed the seat at the threat of violence to have a seat at the table, as it were?
Well, I mean, we gave in to threats of violence when we signed up first to the backstop, or Theresa May wanted to sign up to the backstop, and then Boris Johnson signed up to the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I think part of the problem here, Jamie, is a problem between genuine Brexiteers like you and me and people who actually view patriotism and sovereignty as dirty words. There are people who don't believe in the United Kingdom. There are huge swathes of people in our country who are ashamed of the Union Jack. And one of the reasons I'm fighting so hard on the protocol is because we need to win. It's just a battle, by the way. We need to win this battle so we can win the war on sovereignty. When Boris Johnson said on page 5 of the Conservative Party manifesto in 2019 that he would take back control of our laws, our borders, our cash, and our fish, he actually delivered on none of those promises. But all of those promises go to the heart of sovereignty. And in order to be sovereign, you have to you have to have control of your laws, you have to have control of your borders, you have to have control of your territorial waters, and you have to have control of your cash. And between the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement, we actually have control of none of those. We do not have total control of any of those. And the worst abuse has been Northern Ireland, has been perpetrated on Northern Ireland, which has been cut off from the rest of the United Kingdom.
Yeah. So if you even use Boris's own yardstick, getting Brexit done actually means is Northern Ireland remains subject to the jurisdiction of a foreign court. Northern Ireland remains subject to the jurisdiction of foreign lawmakers, alongside being partitioned out of the United Kingdom. I mean, that's simply not getting Brexit done. That's getting Brexit done for GB and leaving Northern Ireland behind. And I think it's well put. Have you ever seen a worse betrayal of the union in your lifetime?
Jamie, I've never seen a worse betrayal of any peoples outside of war. I mean, in war, you might find that you've got no option but to partition your country because you've lost the war. But we haven't had a war with the European Union. We have become, in history, the first country to partition itself in peacetime without a single shot fired. It's the most extraordinary display of political weakness and ineptitude. And the Prime Minister cannot claim that Brexit is done. No one can claim Brexit is done until we have saved the Union of the United Kingdom and we've genuinely delivered, or the Prime Minister has genuinely delivered on the promises he made on page 5 of the Conservative Party manifesto. And he's got to do it because history, he may be popular at the moment for reasons which we won't go into in this interview, but history will judge him very, very poorly if he is the Prime Minister that presided over the breakup of the Union of the United Kingdom. And there is a read across from Northern Ireland to Scotland, and Scotland is coming down the line. If he can't get a grip in Northern Ireland, we might as well say goodbye to Scotland now.
Yeah. And I suppose just coming towards the end of this, Ben, one issue that's often brought up is that people say that, well, the Northern Ireland Protocol, leaving aside the constitutional issues, there's potential for the protocol for businesses, and it can be the best of both worlds. I mean, what's your view on that?
Well, when I realised that the protocol was inevitable, I did look around for opportunities to make it work. And actually, I mean, there is a theoretical possibility of Northern Ireland becoming a powerhouse of an industrial base for the United Kingdom because it can manufacture goods that can go tariff-free and declaration, well, actually not declaration-free, but tariff-free into the United Kingdom and into the European Union. And I had hoped that might be an advantage for Northern Ireland, but actually it required huge unilateral action by the British government, and it required a proper Brexit for that to be able to take place. Northern Ireland had to have endowed on it preferential tax rates. It had to have significant cash invested in it. It needed a huge investment in its educational system. The government did nothing to protect Northern Ireland from the vagaries of the protocol. And so whilst this theoretical advantage exists of being in the Venn diagram, if you like, of two customs unions, actually in practical terms, it's not there. It's not there. And so having identified it, I think I alighted on it in sort of late January. But by the end of February, I realized that it just wasn't a practical possibility. And the other thing, just while we're talking about legalities, Jamie, of course, it's completely a breach of European Union rules that Northern Ireland should be given any advantage in trade over any other country in the European Union. Because if you recall, and everyone watching this interview will recall, I'm sure as you will, that the EU bangs on about the importance of a level playing field. Well, you can't, on the one hand, say you've got to have a level playing field, but we're going to annex Northern Ireland, but don't worry, because actually it's going to have some economic advantages. I mean, the whole thing doesn't make sense. So I very quickly realized that being in the Venn diagram of the customs union actually isn't going to work. And on the 7th of March in 2020, I spoke at the Bruges Group. It was a meeting where the Conservative Party was in full self-congratulatory mode. You know, they'd got Brexit done and how fantastic it was. And actually, the night I was one of the last speakers, and I got up and said, well, in fact, we haven't got it done. And we've got to, the word I used was repudiate. I think the correct legal term is denounce. But I said, we've got to repudiate the Northern Ireland Protocol. And that's the first step. So for me, Jamie, in summary, the Northern Ireland Protocol offends the Belfast Agreement. It offends the cross-community consent requirements in the Belfast Agreement. It's an abuse of our constitution. it breaks the union of the United Kingdom, and it has to be ditched. And it has to be ditched in order for the Prime Minister to deliver on his central Brexit promise, which is for the United Kingdom to leave the EU as one United Kingdom, and for us to be a genuinely sovereign country. It's as simple as that.
I think that's a fantastic summary to end us on, Ben. Just very quickly, so the viewers are aware that obviously your judicial review to Mr. Justice Colton is awaiting judgment, and it's likely then that that's going to be appealed by either side. Now, I understand that obviously that potentially could leapfrog over the Court of Appeal straight to the Supreme Court. And I think, I'm not sure if you disagree with me, but I think that ultimately the big battle is going to be in the Supreme Court, where this is going to be won or lost.
It will, and I have great faith in the British judicial system. I know some people don't, but I do, and I think, for example, the Supreme Court was right to find that the proroguing of Parliament in 2019 was wrong. I actually think the Supreme Court was right to say that you needed an act of Parliament in order to exercise Article 50 back in 2017. And I believe they'll find the right decision now. And the right decision, as we've discussed, because it's a catch-22, the right decision can only be that the Northern Ireland Protocol has to go, and that it's an offence under Article 46 of the Vienna Convention to have entered into the agreement in the first place, and it should be gone. We haven't touched on it, but it also breaches the Article 50 process, the protocol. It breaches the European Convention on Human Rights and a few other things as well.
Yeah. No, well, Ben, look, thank you very much for your time. It's very much appreciated. And again, just to put on the record, thank you from the Unionist people of Northern Ireland for the interest you've taken in the betrayal, I suppose, which has been forced upon us by the apparently Conservative and Unionist government. And we hope very much that Mr. Justice Colton finds, as we found tonight, that plainly the Northern Ireland Protocol is unlawful, and hope to have you back with Unionist Voice again soon after the judgment.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.